Hi, hello. Welcome to my first video for a while, and apologies, I have a cold, so my voice is a bit gravelly. So this video is in response to some questions I was asked about my faith and about how it relates to certain other faiths. And this was specifically in relation to Islam and Christianity and Judaism, the Abrahamic religions as they're known. And this was about sort of animosity. Somebody I know had seen a video of people at Speaker's Corner in London where people debate. And someone was, a Christian person was debating a Muslim person, and the Muslim person stabbed the Christian person. Or actually, no, it wasn't someone who was debating, but somebody from kind of their entourage stabbed the Christian person. And this led a friend of mine who's not religious and doesn't really understand, how various religions kind of relate to one another, to ask, why? Why is there this animosity that kind of bubbles up like this and sometimes, becomes violent? And also, they kind of mentioned less dramatic examples, like Muslims praying outside of churches, or Muslims buying churches that have lost their congregations. And I suppose, that could be kind of seen as, okay, well, Muslims have to pray somewhere. But then, of course, there's lots of mosques. Why would you choose to pray, directly outside of a church? Or sometimes, on social media, you might find pictures of, let's say, a Muslim person who enters a church and starts to pray. And you might be like, well, that's odd, because, you could pray in a mosque or you could pray at home. So it's strange that you would choose to do that. And of course, a mosque being set up in an old church, you might think, well, it's just practical, it's space, it works, for the same sort of purposes. And there is certainly that argument. However, there is also an aspect to this where Islam's relationship with Christianity and also its relationship to Judaism results in things like a kind of challenge to Christianity's fundamentals, or a challenge to Judaism. And sometimes, regrettably, that boils over into violence. There's a recent news report about a rabbi in London who had been attacked by some Muslim youths, and that's a similar kind of thing. They obviously targeted him for a reason. It's because he is active in the Jewish religion. He's a teacher of it. So I thought I would kind of have a look at this and try to address it, maybe for people who want to know, well, how do these religions fit together? How do they relate to each other? Why is there a tension? So we can start by looking at an image which I have. I'll bring it up here, which I think might be helpful. So here is the image. This is a little diagram that I've put together, and it just kind of shows, okay, well, how Judaism and Christianity relate to each other, because we have to understand that first. And Judaism, it dates from 2000 to 1800 BC, before the Common Era, so a long time ago, and it's usually dated as to when Abraham spoke to God, and God said, you are going to go out and you're going to be the father of a nation of my children, and they'll go on to play a pivotal role in the plan for salvation, the saving of humankind. And so that kind of starts there, and then we go on for, well, thousands of years, and Judaism develops and it splits up into different kind of denominations. And at 0 AD, because we measure our time in relation to the birth of Christ. Christ is born, and Christ is, to Christians, the Jewish Messiah, and to some Jews as well. We'll get on to that. And then around 30 AD to 33 AD, somewhere there, and then Christ is 30 to 33. That's when we have Christ being crucified and rising again from the tomb, and we have the beginning of Christianity. And between then and about 70 AD, we get the falling off, or the dying out, of 3 of the 4 major schools of Judaism at the time. So we have the Essenes, and they're like kind of proto-monks. They wear white linen and they kind of live out in the desert. Mark, the apostle, is an Essene. Then we have the Zealots, and they're like the fighty ones who really take it to the Romans. Then we have the Sadducees, and they're sort of like a priestly class of Jew. And then we have the Pharisees. And the Pharisees don't really die out. They become orthodox, rabbinic, mainline Judaism that we have today. But in the 19th century, so really recently, we have this kind of splitting up of Judaism. We have orthodoxy remains. The Orthodox, kind of the kind of children of the Pharisaic tradition, but we also get the Messianic Jews, and that's a it's still a small proportion of Jewish people, but it's growing very quickly, especially in the Middle East. And Messianic Jews are like, they're like the original Christians, they're Jewish, and they believe that Christ is the Messiah. Then we have the conservative Jews and the Reformed Jews. I'm not going to go too much into kind of the differences between these different schools, mainly because I don't know too much about it and I don't want to stick my neck out, and because what we're talking about here is really just how the different traditions relate to one another. So Christianity is branching off of Judaism, and that's because Paul, the great apostle to the Gentiles, he was Jewish, he was a Pharisee, he was very well educated and immersed in the Pharisaic tradition. He was kind of a shining light of Judaism at the time. He describes Christians, or Christianity, as being a branch grafted on to the root, to the holy root of Judaism, as he puts it. And he maintains that the Jews are a priestly nation, that they have a specific and very important role to play in the plan of salvation. So Christianity is emergent from Judaism, and it kind of has to hold Judaism and Jews as being special in some way, or spiritually. So there we have Christianity growing then, and centuries after Christianity has kind of branched off from Judaism, we have the splitting up of Christianity, and we have the Oriental churches, so the Coptic churches, the Syrian church, Coptic being in Egypt. They break off after a council known as the Council of Chalcedon. And the Council of Chalcedon, basically, people within the church have a bit of a disagreement about the nature of Christ, and the original church says Christ is simultaneously man, simultaneously God. And the breakaways say, no, he only has one nature, but it encompasses both humanity and divinity. You could say that's really kind of just picking hairs, or splitting hairs even. I think that's the phrase. I think so too, but hey, these people, they felt very strongly about it, and off they went. And then another half a millennia later, we have the Eastern Orthodox going off, and that was more due to papal authority, the Pope kind of overstepping, or as far as they were concerned, the breakaway churches overstepping his authority, or his role as the vicar of Christ, the head of the church, and also one of the reasons why the Eastern Orthodox Church split was down to something called the filioque, which is a way of understanding the Trinity and how the Trinity of Christ, the Father and the Son, hold together. And the Catholic Church of the time and now stated, okay, well, the Spirit proceeds from the Father toward the Son, and the Eastern Orthodox did not like that wording, and so the split happened. Once again, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it clearly was. Off they go. And now the Eastern Orthodox Church is kind of like a very kind of culturally specific church. There's the Eastern Orthodox Church is like split up by nationhood. So there's like the Greek, Romanian, Russian, Ukrainian, whatever Orthodox churches, rather than being like the Catholic Church, which is like unified to just be like the whole world, just one Catholic Church. Then 1517, we're getting into the early modern era, the Protestant Reformation. And the Protestant Reformation, it comes around from really understandable stuff, the selling of indulgences, like selling, essentially people paying for forgiveness, absolutely not on, and the selling of like relics that clearly weren't real. Like, I think at some point there was like several heads of John the Baptist circulating, enough pieces of the real cross to make like an ark. It was silly, and fair dues, some people became a bit upset about this. There was also something a split amongst Christians about the role of the Bible and the role of the Pope. Once again, it's authority of the Pope. Some people not happy with it, and what papal infallibility means, which is a whole other thing. And also something called sola scriptura, where some Protestants believe that you don't need a church, you don't even need a priesthood, you just need the Bible, which is odd because obviously Christ did not leave us the Bible, he left us the church, and the Bible was then kind of compiled over centuries afterwards. But anyway, that's how Christianity relates to Judaism. Now, long after Judaism is born, and long after Christianity is born, I know these dates are debatable, another religion is born. This is Islam, and it's born in the 7th century. And it's born when a warrior, someone who engages in things like caravan robbing, a really fearsome bloke called Muhammad is beaten up by a being that claims to be the angel Gabriel, and he's really like battered and tortured by this thing, and he has a really tough time. He, following this event, he then kind of claims to have revelations from God, whom he calls Allah, and and these revelations directly impact Judaism and Christianity, because and that's why I've got in this depiction this religious tradition holding a wood chopping axe, because it kind of needs to chop down this one, because, well, we'll see why, but it challenges essentially the authority and the validity of Judaism and Christianity. So it kind of wants to take this tree down. And it also has its kind of splits, but it's got the Khawarij group, and they bite the dust pretty early on, and then over time we get the Shia and the Sunni, and the Sunni are like 90% of Muslims in the world. Shia, I think, they're 10%. The main Shia power is like Iran, and these two do not get on. Once again, not going to go into that. And also, I realise at this point I should say that there are loads of little splinter groups within these, and within, these as well. Well, especially here. But in these, there are lots of little groups as well. So that, kind of maybe fall under one of those as an umbrella term, but might have, really quite idiosyncratic belief systems. So this kind of makes it look a bit more unified and linear than it actually is. But anyway, we'll just have a look at why this religious tradition of Islam then kind of directly challenges what's going on here, and kind of seeks to cut it down and essentially kind of replace it with itself. So if we have a look at this document, these are verses from the Quran, which is kind of the holy book of Islam. And also a series of texts called the Hadiths, and they are biographies of Muhammad. So Quran, that's the word of Allah, and then the Hadiths are biographies of Muhammad, and Muhammad is like the role model for people according to Islam, so it's really important, to pay attention to his biographies if you're a Muslim. And okay, so why the wood chopping? Why the challenge to Christianity and Judaism? Well, first of all, we just get a denial of Judaism and Christianity in the Quran, and I've got the verses, or surahs as they're known, and where they are. So I don't want to be accused. I don't want this to be seen as like I'm attacking Islam. I'm not. I'm just trying to kind of show why the relationship exists, and I certainly don't want to be accused of taking anything out of context. So please do feel free, you can read the Quran online, you can read the Hadiths online. If you don't have your own copy, put that in, have a look, see what text precedes and follows, just to make sure I'm not doing something like quoting a text that actually says, you will never say that. They have certainly just, I'm not doing that. But anyway, so we see here, this surah, they have certainly disbelieved who say Allah is the Messiah, the Son of Mary. So Christians, like me, we have disbelieved. And then we have certainly disbelieved who say Allah is the third of three. So that is a misunderstanding of the Trinity, because, they're kind of equating Allah to God the Father, Yahweh, and we wouldn't say he's third of three, because, there isn't, they're all equal members. But anyway, of the Godhead. But we have that, and that's, okay, we disbelieve again. And then this one's really interesting, this surah, because it says Abraham was neither a Jew nor a Christian, but he was one inclining toward the truth, a Muslim. This is why Muslim converts are called reverts, because they believe that everyone is naturally a Muslim. So if you convert to Islam, you're actually just reverting to your natural state. And it's also making the claim that Abraham, the person from which Judaism comes, and the person from which Christianity comes ultimately, was Muslim. So, which is odd, considering that, Islam is born many, millennia after Abraham, lived and died. But basically it's saying that, so kind of Judaism has to be null and void because of this. But anyway, then we have kind of verses that take this and run with it, really. So we have these verses that kind of describe Jews and Christians as being cursed, or just not loved by God. So we have the Jews were covered with humiliation and misery. They drew the wrath of God on themselves, or Allah, and it's because they disbelieved and they killed the prophets. And then we have, they said, and this is talking about Jews, our hearts are wrapped, but in fact Allah has cursed them for their disbelief, so they're cursed. Then we have this surah here, and you will surely find them the most greedy of people. So just kind of sowing a bit of discontent, I guess. They're not just cursed; they're greedy as well. And I suppose it's hard to kind of trust someone who's greedy. Surah Al-Maida. This next, the Jews say the hand of Allah is chained. I don't know where that comes from, because I don't think there's anything in the Old Testament or a Pentateuch that suggests that. But it's something that they're being accused of in the Quran, and it says that they're cursed for it. Then this next surah here, the Jews and Christians say we are the children of Allah and He loves us, and then the Muslim is instructed to challenge that and say, well, why does He punish your sins then? This is odd, because in both Jewish and Christian tradition, being punished for sins doesn't mean you're not loved. I mean, I punish my children when they misbehave because I love them. If I didn't love them, I probably wouldn't care what they were up to and just let them carry on, learning bad lessons and behaving in a way that isn't acceptable. So it's an odd verse, this, but it's there. Surah Al-Tawbah, we have this one. This says, the Jews say Ezra is the son of Allah. So Ezra, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, he and a bloke called Nehemiah kind of team up to rebuild the Jewish temple and rebuild Jerusalem after they're conquered by the Babylonians and sent into exile. It's a great book, the Book of Ezra, well worth reading. But anyway, so in this Quranic verse, the Jews say Ezra the son of Allah, and the Christians say the Messiah is the son of Allah. This comes from their mouths. And then it goes on to say, may Allah destroy them because of this, and then questions how they can be, so deluded. So, really not getting painted in a positive light here. Then we have another surah. Whoever desires a religion other than Islam, that is not acceptable, he will be a loser in the hereafter. So I think that means just going to hell. Then we have another surah here. You who have believed, do not take Jews and Christians as allies. And this word, awliya, forgive my Arabic pronunciation, but that can be translated as friends, which is an interesting thing, because this is written in like the 7th or 8th century. So, Christians and Jews as friends, at the time, perhaps not that true. It's certainly not in all places. But anyway, they said they're friends. Don't make friends with them. If you do, then you're one of them, and they are wrong-guided people, and you don't want to be part of the wrong-guided people, essentially. And then we have the hadith. I've just got a single hadith here. It's Sahih Muslim 86a, so you can look that up if you like. As you can pause the video, I think, and look up any of these, or if leave a comment if you want access to this list, which is not exhaustive, by the way. I think there's more, but I think this is necessary to kind of prove or back up what I'm saying, essentially. Anyway, this hadith says, by him in whose hand is the life of Muhammad, there is none amongst the Jews and the Christians who hears about me and then dies without believing in that which I have been sent. It's convoluted, the wording, but essentially saying, like Jews and Muslims, Jews and Christians, they're going to hell because they don't believe in my teachings. So we go. And you might say, well, okay, so they think you're wrong. They think you're going to hell. Maybe they've got a teaching that is akin to Christ's teaching for Christians to love their enemy, and to respond to your enemies. And of course, this is Jewish as well. This teaching of responding to your enemies with kindness. Maybe they're just going to pray for you. Maybe it's just going to be a case of, they think you're wrong, think you're going to hell. Maybe they'll just pray for you and hope that you come around. However, there are kind of calls to action how to deal with the unbelievers of Jews and Christians. In the Quran, this surah here, the Jews and Christians will never be pleased with you until you follow their religion. Say indeed, the guidance of Allah is the only guidance. So this is odd because it's not really a call to action to begin with. It's pretty passive. It's just saying, deny them. Tell them, you're wrong. But it's odd, and it's kind of worth mentioning because the Jews are non-proselytizing. So it's a strange thing. It's not, they're not going to try and convert you anyway. So yeah, Christians, because they are proselytizing, but of course the Christian teaching on proselytizing is famously go out to the villages, go out to the places that have not heard the gospel, spread the good word, which is literally gospel, and if no one listens to you, if no one wants to know, shake the sand from your sandals and carry on. So once again, I think this is an interesting and kind of strange, I guess, verse to have. And it's kind of setting up the rest, I think. There's a kind of them and us being touted here. So we get Surah Al-Tawbah. This next one is a bit more kind of dramatic. Fight those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day, and who do not consider unlawful what Allah and His Messenger have made unlawful, and who do not adopt the religion of truth from those who are given the scripture. So basically those who don't believe. Until they pay the jizya willingly, and they are humbled. So the jizya is a tax that you can place on people who don't adhere to Islam. So it's a kind of not being a Muslim tax. Then we have Surah Al-Fath. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those with him are forceful against the disbelievers, but merciful among themselves. So, the flip side of the jizya, I guess, is the zakat. It's a kind of a tithe to people in need. But of course, this is, this merciful stuff is for believing Muslims. It is the disbelievers who get treated forcefully. And you can interpret that in many ways. Unfortunately, throughout history, many people have interpreted that to mean, physically violent. Then we have Surah Al-Ma'idah. Indeed, the penalty for those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger and strive upon earth to cause corruption is none that they be killed or crucified. Once again here, wage war against Allah and His Messenger. Fair enough, if somebody is waging war on you, and I guess, killing them or crucifying them even might be, what needs to be done to protect yourself. Maybe crucifying as a warning, I'm not sure. But it's the strive upon earth to cause corruption. Once again, that's something that can be interpreted just as not being Muslim. If I... and if everyone is supposed to be naturally inclined to be a Muslim, hence the revert thing, then, when you're kind of not being a Muslim, when you're someone like me, going to mass or what have you, or going to the synagogue if you're a Jew, or just going to temple if, you have something, some other tradition, then that could be interpreted, and has been by some people, to be causing corruption. But obviously not everybody would interpret it that way, which is good. And then we have a hadith, very similar to, the not being friends with Jews and Christians, because they're friends to each other, or not being allies. Do not initiate the greeting of peace with the Jews and the Christians. So it's basically saying, don't... do not have peaceful relations with these people, because they are actively against the will of Allah, I guess, by not being Muslim. And then we have Sahih Muslim. This is in two hadiths. They're both there. The hour, which is kind of Judgment Day, the kind of the end of the world, I guess, and the kind of the time when those who was going into paradise will go into paradise, and those going to hell go to hell. The end, the wrap up of history. The hour will not be established until you fight the Jews. The Jew will hide behind the rock and the tree, and the rock and the tree will say, "O Muslim, servant of Allah, there's a Jew behind me. Come and kill him." So you see how these things could be interpreted to be a challenge, and to be a challenge to Christianity and a challenge to Judaism, and also that people who are Muslims might think, okay, well, I should challenge the beliefs of these people because they're wrong, and I'm kind of called to action in some way. And many Muslims will say, look, all of this is historical. There were wars that needed to be fought, and that's all tied up in that, but there isn't any more, and so we don't need to pay attention to those verses. And, great, very good. I think that's the best way to look at these things. But of course, there's always going to be people who either don't view it that way, kind of read those commands and think, yep, that's in there, that's what my God wants. Or people who maybe think, okay, well, I'm not going to go crucifying anyone or killing anyone, but perhaps I am going to go and disrupt a church service, or kind of like make myself known as kind of like my prayer known as like a protest, as kind of like a show, or go to the speaker's corner and shout at somebody or something like that. But anyway, that's kind of how Christianity in a nutshell relates to Judaism, and how Islam relates to Judaism and Christianity. I should mention at this point that I forgot, a biographer, one of the people who writes the hadiths, a dude called Ibn Shak, who interestingly was the grandson of someone who was captured by Muhammad's armies, and a Christian chap, at a battle. I can't remember the name of it, but it took place somewhere in like modern day Iraq. Anyway, you can look it up. But anyway, this dude Ibn Shak, he wrote one of the hadith, a biography, and he made the claim that Muhammad was actually a descendant of Abraham. So he'd say that I shouldn't have the tree of Judaism and Christianity branching off and a separate tree of Islam trying to cut it down. I should have one tree that has Islam coming out of it and trying to chop the rest of it down. I of course don't accept this because there is no evidence to suggest that is true, and he was writing a long time afterwards, and of course all the names in his genealogy, which you can read, if you read Ibn Shak's The Life of Muhammad, I think it's called, his hadith. He's got like a list of names, but of course they mean nothing to me because they're just names from Arab tribesmen. But anyway, he makes that claim. But of course, I myself do not accept it, and but of course there are many people who do and think that he was right about that. He lived about, I think, 100, 200 years after Muhammad died. Anyway, I hope that clears things up for some people who may be not sure how the religions relate to one another, and why there might be any sort of animosity between the different traditions. Thanks very much for watching and listening. I'll be uploading something else soon, I imagine. Bye.